At that time, Noel Redding said the Jimi Hendrix experience was as green as wet paint, blinded by bright promises of fame, money, and immortality. "I was just a kid back then," Noel reportedly told People years later. 20 years old, walking into this band with all the talk. "We're gonna be huge, we're gonna change everything." For more than half a century, the world accepted one simple story. Jimi Hendrix died alone in a London flat. No witnesses, no struggle, just another tragic rock star who flew too close to the sun. But in the final months before his own death, Noel Redding, the man who shared stages, hotel rooms, and secrets with Jimi, was said to have revealed something far more disturbing. Noel claimed Jimi didn't just die, he was shut down, silenced. According to Noel's late-life conversations, a powerful figure in Jimi's orbit had been slowly closing a fist around him, controlling his money, deciding where he traveled, who he saw, even influencing his sense of safety. And on the night of the 17th of September, 1970, Jimi allegedly told Noel a sentence that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "If anything happens to me tonight, it won't be an accident." Noel reportedly spent decades too afraid to say what he believed out loud, but shortly before his own death in 2003, he was said to have finally revealed the name, the motive, and the missing timeline everyone ignored. And the version of events he left behind is far darker than anything printed in the official record. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Every tragedy has a starting point. Not the explosion everyone remembers, but a quiet, fragile moment that only seems important when you look back from the end. In the rumors that have stalked the rock world for decades, that moment came at exactly 11:18 p.m. on the 17th of September, 1970, when a phone rang in Noel Redding's London flat and shattered what little peace he still had. Noel later told people close to him that the call never felt like a normal conversation, it felt like a warning. Jimi's voice, usually smooth, relaxed, almost lazy with warmth, was different that night. Rumor says it carried a thin tremor that made Noel rise from his chair before he even understood why. According to those Noel confided in, Jimi skipped the small talk. No jokes, no familiar ease. He spoke fast, breathless, like a man trying to stay ahead of something he couldn't see. "Noel," he whispered, "they're closing in. I'm not staying here tonight." Those 7 words would eventually become one of the most repeated lines in every rumor, every underground documentary, every whispered late-night discussion about Jimi's last hours. Noel was said to have repeated that sentence over and over in the years that followed, sometimes drunk, sometimes furious, sometimes visibly shaken, but always with the same unwavering certainty. "He sounded like a man being hunted," one friend claimed Noel told him. According to these rumor circles, Noel asked the obvious question, "Who are they?" But Jimi dodged it. He kept talking in broken fragments, short bursts, as if he believed someone else might be listening on the line. He said he didn't have his passport, that someone had taken it, supposedly to keep him from flying to New York for a meeting no one was supposed to know about. It was said that Jimi had been trying to break free from a contract he never truly wanted, and that someone had started pulling the leash tighter. Some versions of the story say Noel heard muffled voices in the background, sharp, impatient, like an argument happening just beyond reach. Others claim Noel insisted he heard a door slam hard, violently, before Jimi lowered his voice even more and said, "I don't think I'm supposed to be talking right now." According to one roadie who traveled with the band, Noel hung up, looking like all the color had drained from his face. He allegedly paced the room, repeating, "Something's wrong. He's not safe tonight." That same roadie later swore Noel looked like a man torn between running out the door and calling the police. Meanwhile, across town at the Samarkand Hotel, a different thread of rumor was forming. A young woman staying 2 floors above Jimi later said that, around 11:45 p.m., she heard an argument. She claimed one of the voices belonged to Jimi, calm at first, then sharper, then cracking with emotion. The other voice, she said, belonged to a man much older, somewhere in his 50s. A man who, in her words, didn't sound like he belonged there. She couldn't make out the actual words, only the pattern: accusation, denial, pleading, followed by a sudden, chilling silence. She later said it felt like standing outside a storm. Rumor insists that this older man was never officially identified. His name never appeared in the hotel register. Staff reportedly claimed no one matching his description had checked in. Yet some people swore that the same mysterious figure was seen near Jimmy's room earlier that afternoon, wearing a dark coat and standing in the hallway like he was waiting, not wandering. Back on Noel's end of the line, the tension was rising. According to the stories that circulate in fan circles and old interviews, Jimmy finally said something that made Noel's stomach drop. "They want me to sign something wrong, something I didn't agree to." Rumor has it Noel begged him to get out of the hotel immediately. Take a cab, go to a friend's flat, go anywhere that felt safe. Jimmy reportedly said he would. But then he hesitated. And in that pause, Noel could hear his breathing change, fear creeping in, heavy and unmistakable. Then Jimmy said something Noel was said to have never forgotten. "I don't think they'll let me go." Some accounts claim Jimmy's voice cracked on the word let. Others insist Noel described him as resigned, like a man who already knew how the night was going to end. The call ended without a goodbye, no gentle fade-out, just a sudden, dead line. Noel later told People he stood there for nearly a full minute, staring at the receiver in his hand, feeling the weight of something he couldn't name but couldn't shake. A heaviness, a certainty. He wasn't running from drugs, Noel allegedly told a journalist years later. He was running from people. Around midnight, another rumor surfaced. This one came from a taxi driver. He claimed he saw Jimmy standing on the steps outside the Samarkand, glancing over his shoulder again and again, like he expected someone to be right behind him. The driver remembered Jimmy's hands shaking as he tried to light a cigarette. Remembered him dropping the lighter twice. He looked scared, the driver later said. Not drunk, not high, scared. By 12:30 a.m., the atmosphere around Jimmy seemed to shift once more. According to one neighbor, a shadow moved across Jimmy's window. Tall, broad, deliberate. The same neighbor claimed she heard a dull thud a few minutes later, but convinced herself it was nothing unusual. Old buildings make strange noises. The rumors, though, wove all these odd, isolated pieces together into something much darker. A story of pressure. A story of fear. A story of a man trapped in a room he no longer believed was safe. A story suggesting that Jimi Hendrix did not spend that night alone. Hours later, when the world learned that Jimmy was gone, Noel's friend said he didn't react with shock. He reacted with recognition, as if he already knew that the 11:18 p.m. call had never been just a warning. It had been a goodbye he refused to accept. Chapter 2. The Missing 90 Minutes. People who study mysteries say there's always one stretch of time where everything collapses, one gap where the story stops making sense. For Jimi Hendrix, rumor says that gap was the 90 minutes between just after 2 a.m. and nearly 3:30 a.m. on the 18th of September, 1970. Official reports stated Jimmy was alone in the flat. No struggle, no visitors. A quiet, fatal night. But Noel Redding always claimed that version was impossible. He believed there were too many stray details, too many sounds, too many witnesses for the sanitized story printed on paper to be the whole truth. According to neighbors who spoke out only years later, the first strange sign came at around 2:05 a.m. A black van rolled quietly into Lansdowne Crescent. One woman said she happened to be awake, leaning out her window for air, when the vehicle caught her eye. Not because of its speed, but because of its plates. It didn't have any. Just an empty frame reflecting the street lamp. Two men stepped out, tall, rigid in their movements, wearing dark coats despite the mild temperature. They didn't talk. They didn't look around. They just walked straight into the building with the confidence of people who already knew exactly where they were headed. The official narrative never mentioned any van, but rumor insists it was there. What makes that claim even more unsettling is what residents say happened next. Between roughly 2:14 and 2:40 a.m., 3 different people in the building later described hearing noises they couldn't easily explain. Heavy footsteps pounding along the hallway, the low scrape of furniture being dragged, and at least 2 loud thuds strong enough to make the walls vibrate. A young couple staying across the courtyard said they heard a man's voice during that same window, strained, muffled, as if coming through a wall. "Stop, please, just stop." They admitted they argued about whether to knock on a door or call the front desk. In the end, they convinced themselves it was nothing more than a drunken argument. No one intervened. In Noel's alleged retellings, this was the part that haunted him most. He believed these sounds weren't random, weren't accidents, but pieces of what he called the real timeline, the version of events the world was never supposed to see. Rumor says he told one interviewer that if Jimi was fighting for anything in those moments, it wasn't sleep. Witnesses also recalled that immediately after this burst of noise, the entire building fell into a suffocating, unnatural quiet. That silence reportedly began shortly after 2:40 a.m. and stretched for close to 40 minutes. No footsteps, no doors, no voices, not even the usual clanking pipes and creaking floors that old buildings make in the dead of night. Residents described it as too quiet, the kind of stillness that feels intentional. Some conspiracy researchers gave those minutes a name, the dead interval. They suggested that whatever happened to Jimi may have occurred in that manufactured calm. Then, rumor says, something shifted again around 3:20 a.m., though no one could pinpoint exactly what changed. By 3:35 a.m., the same neighbor who had noticed the van's arrival said she heard the low cough of an engine coming to life. When she parted her curtains, she allegedly saw the black van pulling away from the curb. Not speeding, but moving slowly, carefully, as if whoever was inside wanted to avoid every bump in the road. She said the two silhouettes in the front never turned their heads, never spoke, never reacted to anything outside their windows. Once again, no official report ever mentioned them. The van, according to rumor, slipped into the early London fog and was never seen on that street again. When Noel revisited the story over the years, he always came back to those 90 minutes. He died then, he reportedly said. Not when they claimed. According to rumor, he believed everything that happened between 2:05 and 3:35 a.m. was edited, staged, cleaned up, and rewritten by someone who needed the world to accept a simpler ending. Noel said the official timeline felt too polished, too convenient, too empty of witnesses for a man whose every move usually drew a crowd. In the underground world of Hendrix lore, these details form a cold, unsettling picture. A van with no plates, arriving at 2:05. Unexplained noises and a plea for help between 2:14 and 2:40. An unnatural silence stretching toward 3:20. A quiet departure at 3:35 that no document ever acknowledged. And whether those accounts are accurate memories, distorted echoes, or stories warped by grief and time, they continue to fuel one belief: that the last chapter of Jimi Hendrix's life may not have been an accident, not a simple tragedy of chance, but a narrative rewritten in the dark while the rest of the world slept. Chapter 3. The Financial Motive They Buried. People like to think legends are destroyed by chaos, addictions, or self-destruction. But in the rumors that followed Noel Redding into his final years, the thing that truly doomed Jimi Hendrix wasn't a wild night or a reckless habit. It was business. Cold, calculated business. If Chapter 2 was about the 90 minutes when everything went dark, then Chapter 3 is about the pressure Noel believed pushed Jimi straight into that darkness. According to these late-life accounts, the shift began in early September 1970, when Jimi finally made a decision he had been avoiding for months. He was going to cut loose his manager. This wasn't just fan speculation. Noel reportedly told friends that Jimi had spoken about it directly, even defiantly, during a quiet conversation on September 14. They were backstage after rehearsal. The room smelled of cigarette smoke, stale coffee, and damp amplifiers. Jimi, usually distracted by his guitar or lost in some riff, lowered his voice and, according to Noel, said, "I'm not letting him run me anymore. I'm leaving." Noel claimed he had never seen Jimi look so worn down and so determined at the same time. Exhausted by being pulled through contracts, schedules, and obligations. He barely understood, but finally ready to push back. Rumor circles say the motive wasn't emotional, it was financial. People whispered that Jimi had discovered a massive shortfall in his money, roughly $2.1 million in unpaid royalties, a figure that would translate into nearly $15 million today. Those who heard this story secondhand said Jimi was furious, pacing as he talked to Noel, saying he felt betrayed, controlled, and trapped by a system he no longer trusted. He wanted out, and he wasn't whispering about it anymore. According to these rumors, Noel called that decision the fatal one. He said you could feel the air change in the room when Jimi talked about breaking away, as if the words themselves carried consequences neither of them could see yet. 2 days later, on September 16, rumor claims Jimi had a confrontation with his manager that shattered whatever thin piece remained between them. No official witness ever came forward. But one studio engineer allegedly insisted he overheard fragments of the argument through a closed hallway door, raised voices, long, icy pauses, and then a chilling sentence spoken in a low, deliberate tone. "If you walk away from me, you won't walk anywhere." According to this engineer, the entire building seemed to freeze in that moment. It didn't sound like rage. It sounded like a warning. He later said he wanted to tell Jimi to keep his distance from certain people, but he never got the chance. The official histories of Jimi's life never mention this meeting. No paperwork, no transcripts, no formal record. But the rumor never disappeared. It kept resurfacing in old road crew conversations, musician hangouts, backstage stories. It became part of the unofficial legend of Jimi's final days. The idea that he wasn't just trying to leave a contract, he was trying to escape a man who had power, connections, and far too much to lose. According to what people say Noel shared in private, this was when the machinery began to move. Once Jimi said out loud that he wanted to fire his manager and start his own label, Noel believed the situation shifted into something no one around him could reverse. Noel allegedly told a journalist in the 1,990 seconds, he wasn't meant to be independent. That was never in their plan. Rumor suggests Jimi had already started sketching out ideas for his own company. Full creative control, ownership of his masters, freedom from outside approval. He wanted his music, his way. And for someone as valuable as he was, people in the industry at that time were said to consider that kind of independence dangerous. In the last 72 hours of his life, the pressure around Jimi reportedly grew suffocating. Friends noticed he was distracted, restless, talking about flights that didn't seem to exist and meetings that no one else could confirm. One close acquaintance claimed Jimi told her he felt boxed in, like someone had sealed off every exit and he was pacing inside a room with invisible walls. Rumor even describes a strange moment on the afternoon of September 17, just hours before he called Noel. A former associate said she saw Jimi sitting alone backstage, staring at the floor, raking his fingers through his hair again and again. When she asked what was wrong, he supposedly answered, "I'm trying to untangle something that's been tied up too long." At the time, she had no idea what he meant. Years later, when the rumors piled up, the sentence came back to her like a delayed echo. In the versions told around Noel's name, the atmosphere around Jimi in those last days felt charged, not because of his health, not because of his music, but because of how openly he was talking about walking away from everything. Noel allegedly said that powerful people do not sit quietly while their most profitable artist threatens to disappear and take the truth with him. When most fans imagine Jimi's final days, they picture rehearsals, shows, late-night jam sessions. But the rumor version, built from Noel's fragments, worried comments, and deathbed tension, paints something else. A man caught between freedom and obligation, preparing to break from a machine that had fed on him for years and facing the possibility that his departure might expose far more than creative disagreements. Whether the man who allegedly told him, "If you walk away from me, you won't walk anywhere," meant it literally, symbolically, or not at all, that line became one of the most repeated in every retelling. According to rumor, Noel believed that once those words were spoken, everything that followed, the confusion, the missing timeline, the strange movements in the night, wasn't random and wasn't tragic. It was the start of a cover-up. And whether that belief came from hard evidence, haunted imagination, or grief sharpened over time, it became the backbone of almost every theory surrounding Jimi Hendrix for the next 50 years. Chapter 4. The Evidence That Never Made the Reports. Every controversial case has two versions, the one written in official documents and the one whispered in the shadows. According to the rumors tied to Noel Redding's late interviews, the most unsettling part of Jimi Hendrix's death wasn't what the official files included. it was what they left out. Noel spent years insisting that certain details had been hiding in plain sight, details he believed should have changed everything the world thought it knew about Jimmy's final moments. Rumor says Noel always started with the same point. Jimmy's blood alcohol level, it was low. Far too low, Noel believed, to support the popular story that Jimmy had willingly downed a massive amount of wine on his own. And yet, according to rumors repeated among paramedics, his lungs and stomach were found full of wine, not a few glasses, not casual drinking, quantities so extreme that Noel said the medical evidence alone should have alarmed everyone. In one retelling, a paramedic allegedly said the amount of liquid inside him would have been impossible to swallow voluntarily. That phrase, if it was ever really spoken, echoed through Hendrix circles for decades. If true, it suggested something far darker than simple intoxication, something closer to ingestion while unconscious. Rumor says Noel was deeply shaken by that possibility. Friends later claimed they saw him pacing as he talked about it, returning again and again to the idea that Jimmy couldn't have physically consumed that much wine unless it was forced. Noel supposedly told one journalist in 2002, so softly the recorder barely caught it, he didn't choke, he was drowned in wine. That alleged quote exploded across conspiracy forums, documentaries, and late-night arguments. Detractors called it fantasy. Believers swore it explained everything. True or not, it reshaped the narrative. There was more. Paramedics who arrived at the scene, again, according to rumor, never officially quoted in full, allegedly felt something was wrong the moment they saw Jimmy's body. One version claims that when they lifted him, wine spilled from his mouth and nose in a way they had never seen in a typical overdose. Another version says they noticed none of the usual muscular signs of someone who had violently overconsumed on their own. Instead, they thought it looked disturbingly similar to a drowning, just not in water. A veteran first responder was said to have described it as, like someone held his head back and poured until he couldn't breathe. These claims were never cleanly documented. They moved from one journalist to another, half-quoted, half-remembered, but persistent enough to become part of the legend. Then there was the foam. Rumors say that witnesses who saw Jimmy's body before it was moved described white foam around his nostrils and lips, a textbook sign of respiratory blockage, often associated with suffocation or drowning scenarios. In one retelling, a former investigator allegedly said, "That foam didn't come from drinking. That foam came from choking." Whether that statement was flawed science, exaggeration, or a genuine concern that never made it to the paperwork, it didn't appear in the official narrative. It lived only in the fringe accounts. But the most disturbing claim Noel ever attached to these details wasn't about the foam or the wine. It was about what he believed happened after Jimmy was already gone. Noel allegedly insisted, always quietly, always cautiously, that Jimmy's body had been positioned before the authorities arrived. Staged. According to those who heard him talk, Noel believed the way Jimmy's limbs were arranged, the placement of the wine bottle, even the neatness of the bedding felt wrong. Too controlled. Too composed for someone in the middle of a fatal medical emergency. Noel, who knew Jimmy's habits and movements better than most, reportedly said, "He wouldn't have been lying like that. Not naturally. Someone put him that way." Rumor expanded this idea into a chilling theory, that staging the body was a way to rewrite the story before any investigator could start asking the wrong questions. Whoever last saw Jimmy alive, they suggested, wanted the world to accept a familiar narrative, the one everyone expects from a rock star. He lived too fast. He died too young. End of file. According to Noel's alleged conversations, that symmetry was exactly the problem. It was too simple, too easy to close. He always said, "Real life doesn't look that tidy," one acquaintance recalled. Supporters of Noel's version pointed to the strange gaps in the timeline, the witnesses who never testified, the speed with which the case was labeled non-suspicious. Critics argued that grief, guilt, and rumor had twisted his memory. But those who listened closely to Noel claimed he never sounded like a man inventing a story. He sounded like someone weighted down by it. His rumored statements never changed the official cause of death, but they cast a long shadow over the accepted story, adding doubt to every clean line in the report. They left people asking whether Jimi Hendrix had really been taken by fate, or whether fate had simply been the most convenient explanation. Through it all, Noel reportedly held on to the same quiet conviction, shared only with those he trusted. He didn't die the way they said. Someone made sure of that. Chapter 5. Noel Redding's Deathbed Confession. February 2003. In the last weeks of his life, Noel Redding reportedly stopped fearing death and started fearing something else entirely. The idea of dying with a secret still locked inside him. A secret he believed had haunted him for more than 30 years. According to rumor, Noel summoned a journalist he trusted and, in a tired, uneven voice, finally said the name of the person he believed had orchestrated Jimi Hendrix's final night. Noel was said to have paused afterward, drained by the weight of it. But he wasn't finished. He tried to explain why he had never said the name sooner. He talked about threats he believed were real, about feeling watched even years after Jimi's death, about opportunities that vanished whenever he pushed too hard or asked too many questions. Whether those fears were grounded in hard fact or trauma that never healed is impossible to know. But rumor says Noel spoke like a man who believed every word he uttered. He then told the journalist something even more unsettling. He did not want the name published until after he was gone. Not for drama, not for headlines, for survival. Noel reportedly said, "If I say it now, they won't let me live long enough to regret it." The journalist is said to have promised to honor that request. Then came the line that would echo through every rumor thread, every documentary script, every late-night conversation about the case. They didn't kill a rock star. They killed a man who refused to obey. Rumor says the room went completely silent, not just quiet, charged, like the air right after a lightning strike. Noel leaned back, exhausted but strangely lighter, as if finally speaking his truth, or what he believed to be his truth, had loosened something that had been strangling him for decades. The journalist reportedly asked him one last question: "Why now?" Noel's whispered answer was simple: "Because I'm out of time." He died about a month later, in March 2003. The confession was never publicly withdrawn, never corrected, never softened. It simply remained there, floating at the edges of the story, a final attempt to fill in the blank spaces of a case that had been smoothed over and sealed half a century earlier. After Noel's death, the journalist kept his word and shared what Noel had allegedly said, though never revealing the name he claimed to have spoken in that room. That silence, that missing piece, only fed the fire. Speculation spread. Theories multiplied. Some people said Noel's mind had been clouded by age and illness. Others believed his last words were the only honest account anyone ever gave. What kept the rumors alive wasn't just the content of the confession, it was the certainty behind it. Those who knew Noel claimed they had never seen him more sure of anything. Whether he was right or wrong, whether he was haunted or finally at peace, those answers died with him. But his final message remained, hanging over the entire legend of Jimi Hendrix like a warning. The idea that the truth was never lost. It was buried. And in the last stretch of his life, Noel Redding tried, in his own fragile way, to dig it back up. Now the choice passes to you. After hearing the rumors about Noel Redding's final confession, do you still accept the story that Jimi Hendrix died alone in a London flat? Or do you believe someone was protecting a secret worth killing for? Which part unsettled you the most? The missing 90 minutes, the unmarked van, the medical details that never made it into the reports, or Noel's last whispered accusation? If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments.